Okay, it's a bit of a follow-up to the last video because I forgot to make a point, and that is the reason why I think humans are so bad. I think we suck because the bottom line is the reason why humans suck is because we operate on our natural instincts and nature. The nature of nature is to be barbaric, and this is the problem. I think you look at nature, and it's no holds barred. You know, there's no. This is something that Republicans and conservatives would tell you. This is like the entire Republican mindset is built off of this idea. You know, it's a winner take all system. It's only the strong survive type of deal. A lot of evolutionary scientists will try to make you think that this only applies to animals and it doesn't apply to humans. But why you would think that, I don't really know. We operate in the same way the animals do. And it was a world that I was introduced to as soon as I got into junior high school, adolescence, because that's the point at which nature rears its ugly head. Before then, I think I loved being in elementary school, or the early years of elementary school, because there's the competition. There's some competition there, but it's friendly competition. People might say, "Oh, well, I got this, well, I got that." The stakes are low. It's just one word versus another, and your life isn't ruined if you're not winning the competition when you're young. Because everyone still gets along pretty well, and everyone pretty much respects each other because they don't know any better, and things work out pretty well on the whole. And you can be friends. And also you're not that interested in women when you're that young, so it's not a big deal. It's the rewards for being the top kid then don't matter as much because sex isn't on the table at that age, or it shouldn't be, at least, anyway. Um, but but nature starts to rear its ugly head around adolescence, and that's when there's a real pecking order that comes in, as I mentioned in other videos. And that's how it works in real nature too. There's a pecking order in nature. There's the alpha wolf, and then there's the beta wolves, and then there's you know whatever, the omega and all that kind of thing. I don't know. People made all this other stuff about sigma or whatever, but basically there's the wolves, that get taken care of, that are part of the pack, and then there's the outcast. There are outcast wolves. There's outcast of every animal. Some animals have, and it's usually just based around a natural, whether or not you are in the top tier of nature's favor, has to do with how well did you come out? How well did the recipe come out? Everyone has a recipe, and it's supposed to come out a certain way. And sometimes nature makes mistakes, and it doesn't come out right. And when something doesn't come out right, there's a good chance that there's something genetically wrong there. And so the reason why nature is cutthroat, the reason why there's no hold barred in nature, and why it's also the same when you get to adolescence, is because nature wants to promote the best version of itself. And the best version of itself are the recipes that come out right, not the ones that come out wrong. Now, at least this is how nature feels about it. Now, as a human, with the level of thinking that we do have, we can look and say, well, sometimes you make a recipe and something comes out wrong, and it's actually good. It adds something nice. You've got my cousin once tried to make this dessert where he'd put a bunch of butterscotch and I think it was like butterscotch and, was it vanilla or chips or something like that? I don't remember. And it didn't do what he expected it to do. He expected it to kind of melt over the top, and instead it fell to the bottom and made like this hardened kind of thing at the bottom that was like, and so he thought that he'd failed, but then they tried it and they absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. So the same thing can happen with humans. Sometimes defects end up being a catalyst for us to overcompensate for those defects. And in the overcompensation, if there happens to be, other things, like for example, you can have a defect in one area, but you could also have a skill in another area, something that's better than other people. And so sometimes the defect might push you to be like, well, I have to overcompensate for this defect. So then this skill, which would normally be down here, now you're pushing the skill to overcompensate for the defect, and you've pushed the skill so hard that now all of a sudden it's extraordinary. The defect doesn't matter as much because you've introduced something to the world that wouldn't have existed without the defect. Otherwise it would have just been here. But because you're overcompensating, suddenly you've pushed this other skill you have, and it's like, wow, this is impressive, and people want it, and the world appreciates you for it. So I think there are times when, as a human, you can see, I think we can compensate in a way like, if a wolf has a defect, it's hard, and he's put in the outcast group, he doesn't get to join the pack. It's hard for him to make up for that, but as humans, we can. So I guess that is the one difference between us and the rest of nature. But on the whole, you know, if you don't have one of those higher than usual abilities that can account for the defect, then just like in the natural world, the natural world has ways of ensuring that those defects do not pass on. And, you know, in the natural world, it's pretty brutal how it happens. It's they get eaten. The defected ones get eaten a lot of time. They don't survive, or they don't survive for a lot of reasons. Sometimes they get pushed. They have to. The mother bird pushes them out of the nest, and it's fly or die. That's it. And you see these things on nature shows all the time, and it's just the barbarity of nature. It's hard to stomach. It really is. There's no. We give out. We try to make everyone feel like they're worth something, but nature doesn't have any interest in making the lesser, the defective feel like they're worth anything. The nature's interest is to get rid of the defective, or to keep it from having to creating, from breeding, so that it can create more copies of the defect. And for the most part, that's how it works. That's why, another reason, as I mentioned in the last video, I'm angry at God, because God gave me a defect, and the defect has, if I'd been given another ability that could have, like I said, pushed me over, then it would have been okay to have the defect. I could have done something great, regardless of it. But because I didn't have any other great ability, nature took its course, and I was barred from breeding. The way it pretty much worked is nature decided, well, it's like this guy has to be discounted, and he has to be, not be attractive because of his defect. So I guess that's the point. What I'm trying to say here is that, it's like, this is another reason why I think just God is cruel, because you're born, people, these, whether it's a human or whether it's an animal, you're born with these defects, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything to deserve them. But here you are with it, and, you're having a unique experience. It's your own. And your experience is one of pain and suffering because things didn't go right, because something went wrong. And the people and animals that are born with those defects, they do not deserve to suffer the way they do. I'm just going to say that, it's you don't deserve to suffer for defects that you had no control over. And so there's a lot of us. It's not, I had my own thing, I had gynecomastia. Other guys have really ugly faces. Other guys are very weak, or they're very short, or, they have some kind of condition of some sort that causes them to look bad or whatever. But it's not fair to any of us, and this is where, I take issue with, and I could say I take issue with God, but really this is just probably like the mechanisms of nature breaking down, not working properly. And if you don't believe in a God that chooses these things consciously, then you just got screwed by fate. You got a bad luck of it. You got a bad roll of the dice, and you just got to deal with it. And it sucks. You can do whatever you can try to do to overcompensate for it, but in a lot of ways, when you're put at that disadvantage from the beginning, it makes it even harder to overcompensate unless you have an extraordinary skill. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this is the reason why, because of the nature by its nature is so barbaric. The reason why humans are not a better life form, and why I think, there's some question to the value of us as a species altogether, is because we have all that barbarity within our instinctual drives and desires, and those are the things that drive us. It's our instincts that drive us, and there's a part of our brain, a better nature, that if you know, I believe if we were made in a more just world or just universe, that there would be another part of us that would say things like, for example, don't date gorgeous women because more often than not they're stuck up and they haven't developed any kind of a personality because they haven't had to. They're boring. Their tastes are boring. You know, they've been handed too much throughout their lives, and it's made them vapid people. Most often than not, the best-looking people are usually pretty vapid. There's obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, and there are some good-looking people that are also very smart, but for them, and there also are good-looking people who are very interesting. But for the most part, um, really good-looking people are, you know, they're either not going to be particularly interesting or they're going to be bad people because they know they have a certain power. And again, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and nothing's more powerful than having that ability to be attractive just based on things that you never earned. You never earned those looks. That's just something you were given. And all I'm saying is that for me, it's like I want to be with an attractive woman, but if I wasn't driven by my lower instincts, I would know that that's not what's important in a relationship. But I'm not going to get any joy if I listen to my higher instincts and say, I'm going to go for someone who's interesting and not who's good looking. Well, I'd end up with somebody who is interesting, and on some level that would be a good thing for me. But on another level, I'm not going to get that reward from the pleasure center, the dumb lizard part of my brain that says, this girl not make good baby. This girl not make good baby that, go forward and get another, pass my seed or whatever, pass my genes. It's a barbaric way of thinking. It's primitive. And that's like our operating system. That's the problem. We are on the operating system of nature. It says, well, if I have a child and he's weak, then, maybe it's better off if he dies, I'm not trying to say that's what people think, but I'm just saying that, that's what other people think. If you have a child and your child is weak and helpless and can't do anything, then other people are going to think your kid's worthless, it's a drain on the world. They may not say that. They might pretend that they care, but they don't care, And people around him, his peers, will make him feel like, we'll make sure he doesn't have the opportunity to spread his genes. We'll make sure that he knows that he is a reject and that he shouldn't pass them on. And same thing goes with like what animals say. I need to get resources for my so I can have kids and my kids can eat well or whatever. Or maybe they just, most of the guys, it's like I need to have resources so that the lady animal will choose me, and then I have kids, and then I have because I bring home because I kill the gazelle the best. My kid will have good gazelle meat all the time, and it'll grow up to be strong. And that's basically translates to hoard resources in humanity. Just hoard resources, so that you know I will have my pick. I can sleep with a lot of different women. They'll have all my kids. I'll have the money to send money to, just like Elon Musk with all his kids. It's that kind of barbaric thinking that leads Elon Musk to have whatever. I don't know how many kids he's got now, 20 kids or whatever, or NBA basketball players, or any guy who has a lot of money who wants to, It's like that's what we're motivated by as guys. We want to have resources at our disposal so that women will find us attractive, and women want to pick the guy with the most resources, regardless of how he gets those resources, because they want to have their kids taken care of. And so we're a slave to this barbaric nature of the natural order. And the real problem with that is it probably wouldn't be a big deal if, like other animals, we just lived in. Other animals, they don't have the capacity to do anything but live in balance with nature. That barbaric nature works for animals because they don't know how to manipulate it in such a way that it can do any harm. But we take that operating system of that barbaric nature, and on top of it, with the ability to use our mind to accrue resources in a way that is out of balance with the rest of nature. We take more than our fair share. And I feel like on some level, well, it's a temporary thing that we can take more. We use all of our brain power not to come up with ways to transcend our barbaric instincts, but to amplify them, to give us agency to enact the most extreme version of those instincts. And that's the problem. Humans are too good at maximizing their instinctual drives, and it leads to a lack of balance. And I do think at some point we'll be put back in balance, whether we like it or not. It hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. And it'll be a much more cataclysmic than if nature is not going to be regular kind of like animals and plants and animals are not going to be able to. I guess invasive species is probably like the closest thing you could imagine. So in that way, like humans are kind of like an invasive species on the entire planet. Invasive species come in and take too many resources for themselves, and everything else around it dies out, and then it ends up dying out because it's stolen too much of the local resources. Eventually, it can't even sustain itself. I think in the long run, I don't know. At some point, you got to think it upsets the balance so much that even it wouldn't be able to survive. But I'm not even sure. It doesn't seem like that ever happens. I don't know if everything you kill the entire ecosystem, which is I think what happens a lot of times with these invasive species. You kill the entire ecosystem and yeah, I don't know if it can still survive, but we're going to kill the entire ecosystem just like an invasive species. We're going to take too much for ourselves. We're going to kill a lot of what we rely on, and in the long run, it's going to wipe us out. And so I guess I just wanted to make that point. It's like that's why I feel like if we were designed by a god, then it would have to know that this was going to be the end result, given our capabilities. And given the fact that we're not driven by a search for enlightenment as much as we are driven by a search to fulfill our base needs. At least most of us, or at least the people who accrue power. They're usually driven, the people who really accrue power are not driven by a need for enlightenment. They're driven by a need for their base needs. And this is the problem with the world, is that the powerful are not people searching to be enlightened. The powerful are people searching to dominate nature the way the alpha wolf dominates in nature. And, I don't think that humans are capable of getting beyond that. I don't think the people that are searching for enlightenment have the capability they don't really have the drive to dominate in a way, that's the problem, is that the people who are interested in enlightenment are interested in enlightenment, and if you're interested in enlightenment, you're not going to try to dominate the people who are interested in dominating. So that's why people who are interested in dominating and become captains of industry are deep down not good people, because they're really tapping into that need to be alpha dog instead of a need to kind of push humanity further to be something more than what it is. And when people with that kind of infinite ambition, unstoppable greed, unstoppable need to dominate as part of the natural instinct. When those people are in power, you're going to find that their ability to um, put modern technology at their disposal is going to destroy the ecosystem and leave us in a place where we can no longer survive. So, I really think it's a shame. It's like God could have designed a human, a species like humans that were more interested in enlightenment and that was, didn't run off its base instincts first and foremost. But that's why we're evil. It's because we run off of that. We run off of that, and we're too smart for our own good. And the smart part isn't the problem. The problem is that our 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 instinctual drives are what makes people do anything. And I don't think it's going to change with humans. And we'll have to wait around until something new comes about, and hopefully, I don't know. It's like I want to say, well, hopefully that does happen, but it's like we're not here anymore, and I'm part of the failed species, so it just kind of sucks. Bad design. I don't know if this is like supposed to teach us a lesson, but if this is supposed to teach us a lesson, it's a lame lesson. It's like, yeah, here you are, you suck. Figure out that you suck. Yeah, great. Now you're dead. Ha ha. That's God.